Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is Friday, July the 24th, 2026. I'm Carlene Johnson, the Center Square's state government reporter. And in today's episode, another Washington state record. This is not a good one. The most money ever paid out in a single year for lawsuits, most of those against the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, DCYF, for children harmed or killed while under state supervision, children in foster care. We'll get into some of those numbers and some reaction from a state lawmaker who's trying, and has for years been trying, to do something to help that troubled agency. Then data center debates. Of course, we talk a lot about this here on Washington in Focus Daily. The city of Spokane and Spokane County have both decided to consider various moratoriums. In fact, the city council's already passed one. So I had a conversation yesterday with Congressman Michael Baumgartner. That's his district. He has some pointed comments and concerns about cities just outright passing these moratoriums and potentially losing out on the economic boon that could be provided. Also in Spokane, the mayor and council may get fat raises. Salary Commission thinks that they have earned it. Some citizens, not so much. And my colleague Tim Clouser's article actually inspired a woman to show up at this week's City Council meeting for some comments directly about those fat raises being proposed. And then finally, again, Tim Clouser and my colleague TJ Martinell with a podcast of their own, including more fiscal fallout. TJ's article detailing just how much our state budget has ballooned in the last 25 years. It's a pretty shocking number. So stick around for that in today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. All right, let's dive in. Washington state's astronomical payouts and legal costs have set another record, reaching nearly $614 million in the past fiscal year. Now, the state ponied up more than $537 million of that to settle lawsuits and claims alleging really government negligence in the 2026 fiscal year is what we're talking about, which ended June 30th. So that's up from roughly $500 million in 2025. Now, in addition, the state paid out about $76 million of that for legal defense costs. Sometimes they had to contract out to law firms to help the state because the AG's office didn't have enough of their own to try and settle these cases. These are, in most cases, the result of the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, DCYF, involved. They are responsible for the foster care system, investigating child abuse and neglect, running the juvenile detention facilities. And as we have reported extensively with the Keeping Families Together Act, oftentimes children are left languishing in these homes. They end up seriously hurt or in many cases, unfortunately, killed. And then, of course, you've got these lawsuits that come as a result. Now, no lawmaker that I know more about, or I should say, is trying to do more about this than Representative Travis Couture of Allen. He's a Republican, and he has been trying for years to make some changes to the Keeping Families Together Act, make some changes in the Department of Children, Youth, and Families so that we can stop doing so much harm to children. And he has every intention, he just told me in the conversation we had yesterday, of doing more about this. And in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be able to share exactly what he is doing on the national stage to try and bring some correction here and really ultimately to save children and address this crisis. So here's part of my conversation with Representative Travis Couture.
When you have a state government and state agencies that continuously harm people and break the rules, this is the result of that. So our enormous tort liability, I guess you can call it, is a direct result of Washington state government harming Washington state citizens, either through its policies or laws or by not following the law, right? And so there's these massive payouts, billions and billions of dollars. So you talked about the 500 to 600 million that is going to be paid out this year. So we have something called self-insurance liability, SELA, as it's called. And so all of the agencies are most of them are self-insured. And so when they get sued, all of the payouts, they have to pay basically a minimum. Think of it like a credit card, right? And the legislature can set how much it's going to pay that debt down, whether it's the minimum payments or more, right? And as we look off into the future, years and years into the future, there is billions of dollars. And this is something I've been complaining about as one of the budget leads in Olympia, is that the Olympia's budget balance sheet does not show, like any normal balance sheet, any unfunded liabilities. It doesn't show your long-term debt, your long-term liabilities. So if you were to add on top of our really structurally weak budget right now, this billions upon billions more in debt because of lawsuits that were, frankly, a lot of times completely preventable. The bulk of them is Department of Children, Youth, and Families, and whether it's child welfare or foster care or juvenile rehabilitation, pretty much, all the things under Department of Children, Youth, and Families umbrella, we're breaking people and we're harming them, and we're going to pay the cost for doing that through a court. A lot of things are just so broken with Department of Children, Youth, and Families, and you don't really see Tonneson around a lot. I did get a letter from her during the legislative session, basically blaming the Keeping Families Together Act for not being able to remove the 9-year-old in Aurora from the tent. But at the same time, she will go out in public and defend this law. And so you never really know which Tana you're going to get, the one that wants to, whisper sweet nothings into the public's ear, or the one that she really is. And that's kind of the problem. And to date, where is the department to request legislation to fix all of these problems? It's nowhere. It's different legislators like me who are, fighting so hard to try to fix these things with nothing but pushback from the department. And they have not raised a finger to help. And when they do push forward something that they claim will be helpful, it's really a nothing burger. And so it is kind of like, where's Waldo? And I think that's the old political version of, if you just hide in the basement long enough, they'll forget about you.
Now, lawmakers this year did have a proposal that would have required arbitration for some of these civil cases against government agencies. It would leave the outcome to sort of a neutral third party. The state of Ohio does this already. They have what they call the Court of Claims. So that proposal, as it moved through the legislature this past session, kind of got watered down, such that really the teeth came out of it. And there were also testimony from trial lawyers in opposition to this, because of course they're the ones that stand to make great financial gains when you have these large lawsuit payouts. So ultimately the legislation did not make it through this session. All right, now moving on to data centers and Spokane's resistance, if you will. My colleague Tim Clouser put up an article early this week talking about how the Spokane City Council last month approved a 1-year moratorium on data center projects. And this week, then, Spokane County Commissioners followed suit, proposing a 9-month version of a moratorium for the county. So that would cover a much larger area. Now, 3 Republicans got involved and they proposed, okay, maybe we should just do kind of a zoning ordinance here, not put the kibosh completely on data center development countywide, but create some zones where there might be less, NIMBYism going on. It ended up, at this point, not really moving forward. There's going to be further discussion of this. It's not a complete done deal one way or the other. But because of Tim's article, I had an opportunity this week to speak with Congressman Michael Baumgartner, and Spokane is included in his district. So I knew this was an issue that is on his radar. And I asked him about the debate, because it seems like the resistance that might have been more on the conservative side, some of that has been diminished when you have some of these big players, these corporations coming in going, okay, so here's what we'll do, in return for this. Maybe we'll create our own power supply for this. Maybe we're going to, have our own water system so that we're not sucking off of the power grid and, off of the utilities. And so the ratepayers aren't ultimately, the ones who are victimized by this. So I want to share part of my conversation with Congressman Michael Baumgartner and where he kind of comes down on the whole data center debate.
We got to make sure data centers are done right in a way that communities understand. No community that a lot of data centers are essentially a local government decision. But I've introduced legislation that would make sure that data centers don't increase folks' electricity rates and don't increase water rates. And then it's really into a community discussion. A lot of people worry about data centers and artificial intelligence technology, but also, these technologies have a lot of potential to do things like discover pancreatic cancer at an earlier period to save lives. Obviously, there's a lot of national security implications with advanced computing technology and making sure that we can't have China having better computers than we have. But there needs to be better communications with industries. And if somebody like Spokane is going to ban a data center, I think they need to understand why are they doing that and explain it and make sure that people understand the issues. So I think there's things that Congress can do. I think there's some things that utility providers can do, to improve this conversation. But you're certainly, the premise of your question is, there's a lot of economic growth and that comes with this as well too, and then also things that supercomputers can do from the like medical advancements and others that have benefits.
So it's a complicated issue, right? Because in that Spokane case, this large load customer, unnamed large load customer that was going to be moving in for a data center, they were kind of negotiating with Avista, the utility provider there, and they said it would use up to 500 megawatts, that one data center, not producing their own power. So that, sucking off the grid that much, obviously would have created concerns. So it's not an issue that is easily solved. It's not really a Republican, conservative, liberal Democrat issue to solve that way. But at this point, we certainly do have more red states that are kind of making accommodations and finding ways to allow these data centers to move in than we do blue states like Washington. All right, since we're talking about Spokane, and it's props again to my colleague Tim Clouser for his reporting, because after his story this week on the mayor and city council potentially getting a fat raise, while others in city government recently got the axe because of the budget deficit, some taxpayers with questions about those proposed fat raises, like 23% or something for the mayor, showed up at this week's council meeting and were referencing the Center Square and Tim Clouser's reporting.
Next, I have Jordan Redshaw.
Hello. My comment today is regarding a recent news article that centered on salary increases for city council and specifically the mayor by the Salary Review Commission. I want to focus specifically on the salary increase that was proposed for Mayor Lisa Brown. According to this article, I couldn't find the minutes for this meeting as they were not published online, so I am relying solely on the facts within this news article. Salary Review Commissioner Bo Madsen suggested an increase of her salary to $230,000 a year starting next year. This would be a 23.4% increase from her current salary and would have her alone making nearly 3 times the median household income in Spokane, which is $75,800. I want to know, what can we as citizens of Spokane do to keep this in check? We are in a budget deficit. We have people who are being let go from their positions within the city government, yet we have enough money to make our mayor one of the highest paid individuals in Spokane. I want to know what we can do to have our voices heard on this issue and remedy it, because I really think it is out of touch for our mayor to sit here aloft this giant marble throne and tell us, oh, we don't have money in the budget for these jobs, but she can have a 23% salary increase. And I understand that she is not the one making these decisions, but the council is appointed by her and confirmed by the city council. So what can we all do together to ensure this does not happen?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Council President, if I may, the Salary Review Commission intends to have a hearing on Friday, July 31st, which I'm not sure if it's the 30th or 31st. I think notice that meeting will be sent out probably next week, a couple days before, and the public would be welcome to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
So Tim's article noted that the Salary Commission has until August the 30th to decide how much the salaries will actually increase for the 2027-28 period. So stay tuned for much more on that. And finally, in keeping with our, I guess, all Tim Clouser all the time theme in today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily, Tim Clouser and my colleague TJ Martinell have a podcast to share with you today. This is kind of keeping with this series of fiscal fallout stories that TJ has been writing on extensively, because the Washington state operating budget, I don't care where you come down, has exploded in the last 25 years. So they went back and looked all the way from 2001 up to where we are now. So 25 years, total 30% increase seems pretty significant. So here are my colleagues, TJ Martinell and Tim Clouser.
Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Clouser, with the Center Square's Washington State investigative reporter, TJ Martinell, here to talk about state spending at Olympia, where a report from earlier this week showed that since 2001, state spending has increased 230%. TJ, the Democrats said that they want to know what's going on here, but aren't they the ones in control of the budget?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, there was a couple of years where there was split rule. The Senate was controlled by the Republicans, and that was during the 2010s, and that's when there was a lot of very long budget fights, and there was also very long legislative sessions because they had to keep going into special session to figure out the budget issues. So, well, yeah, now, just for context, the 230% is unadjusted for inflation, which we've seen like 50% inflation or 45% since 2001. So, but at the same time, still, if the budget had stayed at the same spending level, it'd be at around $45 billion per biennium, not the $80 billion. So it's the spending has still increased dramatically. Yeah, I mean, unadjusted for inflation, it's doubled. And what's also interesting is I think 42%, almost half of all that new spending was in K-12 education. So what really happened, it seems like, is that there was during the recession, the budget really kind of flatlined. They had to cut. It's not so much they cut spending, but they had to cut because they had expenditures that they couldn't afford because there wasn't any revenue for it. And then you had the 2013 state Supreme Court decision, the McCleary decision, that said that the state wasn't adequately funding basic education. The local levies, school districts were paying for basic education in part. And so the state said, you need to be taking on all that financial responsibility, which is why there was all those budget fights in the 2010s, because that was when people were talking about progressive income tax and saying we needed to fund basic education. And there were debates over that. There were discussions, and the Republican controlled Senate said, no, we're not raising any new taxes. And one of the reasons that they've gotten away with this stuff without is, in as much as they've raised taxes recently, during that time, they were also getting an incredible amount of surplus revenue or unanticipated revenue that allowed them to increase spending. And we're only now seeing where they're facing budget deficits, despite the fact that they're bringing in more revenue than they ever have before. So it's pretty remarkable, the transformation of these state operating budget.
Yeah, I mean, the McCleary decision added a lot of weight to the budget, definitely. But since then, I mean, the state has also passed the Climate Commitment Act and brought a wealth of new spending with that. There's been a lot of other Democratic priorities that the party has advanced that have inflated the budget. I mean, we're talking about $80 billion today. And you said, adjusted for inflation, had it kept pace with population growth and everything else, we would have been closer to 45 billion. I mean, that's a massive increase. And then last year, we saw the state house raise taxes by $10 to $12 billion. This year, they passed an income tax that's going to go before the Supreme Court likely in the next year or so. And they're already talking about another budget deficit next year. I mean, it seems like the last few years, we've seen these deficits time and time again, and the Democrats in Olympia just turn to the taxpayers to have them fill that budget. I mean, do we ever get to a situation where they say, hey, we need to establish a new baseline and try to avoid increased spending?
I mean, that's going to be the question, and it's really going to come down to whether or not they're afraid of voters coming in and voting them out of office on the basis that we need state lawmakers that look at the budget and say, where can we cut spending, not where can we add taxes? And so far, I think that what we've seen is they've managed to get away with that with raising taxes. But I think with the income tax, I think this is where voters potentially could give a big no in the November election.
Another big no. I mean, this has been on the ballot 10 or 11 times. It's been rejected 10 times. I think the only time that voters passed it was back in the 20s or the 30s. So about 100 years ago. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how budget negotiations go, not only this year, but the next year, because we're entering into another biennium. So it's a 2-year thing. They're going to set the budget this year or whatever. And then they're going to have to make adjustments after the first year. But we're in the middle of an election cycle, and you have major figures like Senator Jamie Peterson. He's the Senate Majority Leader. He's from Seattle. He was the key figure behind the passage of the state's new income tax. And he's facing quite a bit of competition on the ballot this year. I mean, the local legislative district, the Democratic districts in Seattle are endorsing his competitor, who is arguably a more progressive candidate, and said that the income tax didn't go far enough. So, I mean, you have figures coming into the state house potentially that are saying, hey, we need to put more money behind this. Meanwhile, we're looking at another budget deficit. And correct me if I'm wrong here, the state budget office didn't even put a number on it when they announced it last month. They just said, hey, we're looking at another shortfall. We don't know how big it's going to be, but tighten your belts.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what's going on is we're going to have to wait for the September forecast, which it's very timely that it's going to be coming out right before the election, because what you'll probably see is you're going to hear two different narratives. You're going to hear a narrative from people who say, look at how much of a deficit we have. This is why we need this progressive income tax, or this millionaire's tax, this income tax. Then you're going to have people who are going to say, look at how much of a deficit we have, despite the fact they raised all these taxes in recent years. Why do you think another tax is going to fix this problem? Because if they couldn't figure it out, historic tax increases and record revenue levels, and they still have a deficit, and you've got two former governors, Governor Gregoire and Governor Gary Locke, saying, yeah, this is at least Gregoire said this is a spending problem. And, Gary Locke has expressed concerns about the income tax. And so, it's difficult for people who are maybe relatively new to the state to understand how different the political narrative used to be in the state, where it would, especially in the 2010 initiative 1098, nobody wanted an income tax. No, even precincts in Seattle, I think there was one precinct that voted in favor of the income tax. Everybody else in the entire part of the state said no. And so now we're having this fight all over again. But like you said, lawmakers who crafted it specifically to legalize progressive income tax, they're being endorsed, or their competitors are being endorsed. And so it really raises questions as to, if the current lawmakers get voted out, who's coming in, and are their policies going to be that their predecessor didn't go far enough, like you were saying? So it's almost like they look at the 230% increase since 2001 and they say, well, we got to pump that up. That's rookie number.
And TJ, we're a few months out from the next state budget negotiations and them really crafting the budget for the next year or two. The process can feel pretty far removed for the average citizen. They see these people that, maybe they elected, maybe they read into them, maybe they didn't before putting them into office, but they see them as in control of state spending. Like, they can't really do much outside of maybe posting on Facebook or other social media platforms. What are ways that voters can get involved in the budget making process and make their voices heard, whether it be now or as we move into the next legislative session?
Yeah. So, I mean, aside from following our coverage at the centersquare.com, they can talk to their elected officials. They can go to tvw.org. There's different ways for them to research it. And of course, with AI now, you can ask Grok or Chat GPT, trust but verify what you see there. But I mean, the best way to do is follow our coverage, because that's our bread and butter.
Well, TJ, appreciate you covering this, and definitely a topic we're going to keep our eyes on heading into the next legislative session. Anyone hoping to read TJ's stories and others from the Center Square, you can catch them at thecentersquare.com. Otherwise, thank you for joining us for another episode of Washington in Focus.
So that is a wrap on today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily for this Friday, late into July already. We're going to be in August in a week. Don't forget, fill out your primary ballots. We've got our August 4th primary coming up, but everybody's got their ballots already, so you can fill those out and get them turned back in. And just quick thoughts about our friends that I know are watching in Central and Eastern Washington as well. Several big fires going. We've lost many homes in the last 48 hours. So thoughts and prayers with all those folks and all the brave firefighters that are out trying to do their best to save those communities. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again on Monday. Have a great weekend.